Welcome in, SEC baseball fans. This is Jake McKeever and Alex Day back for another exciting week breaking down some of the SEC. Little surprises, little dramatics, but we'll go ahead and jump right into it with the upset of the weekend. Mississippi State taking 2 of 3 from LSU. LSU took game one behind a great start from Paul Skeens. Ty Floyd was pretty good, but he kind of got into a higher pitch count. And then everybody else from the LSU bullpen staff was just absolutely terrible. Alex, I'm sure you had your eyes on this one. What'd you kind of do?
Yeah, this one hurt. This one hurt bad, especially on Saturday where you got a great start from Ty Floyd. He had a career high 10 strikeouts, gave you 6 innings of work, everything you asked, and then the two guys that come out of the pen are the same two guys that came out last Friday against Auburn with a 2-run lead, just like in the situation they came in on Saturday. And then last week they held the line and they were awesome. This week they gave up 6 runs. And LSU lost that game. And then on Sunday, just nobody, the starter, Javen Coleman, he's coming off injury, so he only went 3 innings, and that was planned. He hit his pitch count, and he was done. And he only gave up 1 run. Each of LSU starters only gave up 1 run. And normally that's going to be good enough, especially with an offense as good as LSU's, that you're going to win this at least the series, if not sweep. But man, the bullpen could not buy strikes, and if they were strikes, they were being hit over the fence. Like it was just bad. There's no other way to say it. One of the most common words I've heard to describe it is indefensible. It is indefensible for this team in that situation. They had an opportunity to take a stranglehold on the SEC, lock up a top 8 national seed, and then to come out like that is just it's more than disappointing.
And we'll kind of try and be a little bit positive. I think Ty Floyd's going to be a big key for LSU. I mean, we know what they're going to get out of Paul Skeens, and we're starting to kind of see what they get out of the bullpen. I think he's going to be probably the big X factor going forward. And again, when you score as many runs as they did on Sunday, I believe it was 13, as a coach, you kind of expect to win those games, and LSU just didn't. Credit to Mississippi State for not folding their tents because, in the grand scheme of things, this thing meant nothing for Mississippi State. They need to sweep Texas A&M and have a ton of help just to even make Hoover. And if they don't make Hoover for the second straight season, they're definitely not making the tournament for the second straight season. So in the grand scheme of things, you almost want to see jokingly, did LSU lose this game on purpose to avoid being the number 1 seed as they kind of go to stay cursed, avoid that. But I think that LSU is going to have to really kind of tinker with their bullpen this next weekend. And it kind of raises the question, too, just looking ahead, how Jay Johnson kind of does a regional. Do you not throw Skeens on the first game? Because, again, they don't really have anything outside of Ty Floyd.
Yeah, I mean, Skeens and Floyd are definitely your best 2 options. And then other than that, no one's executing right now. I mean, everyone's got great stuff. They're all talented. They're just not executing. And at this point in the season, I don't know what to say to change that. But yeah, I mean, Mississippi State, I mean, they got down 13-4 early in Sunday game, and they didn't bat an eye. They came out and they just swung the bats. I mean, they've got a good lineup. Mississippi State has had 2 bad years, but there is talent on that roster. There are some really good hitters. Hunter Hines is a beast. I mean, Dakota Jordan, the switch hitting shortstop, Mershon, he was a problem all weekend for LSU. He was really, if I wasn't an LSU fan, it would have been really fun to watch.
And I think that that's kind of true for a lot of SEC teams like Auburn, Texas A&M, even Georgia to some extent, where they just don't have the pitching. And I know a lot of people have kind of pointed to, maybe it's the balls, maybe it's the pitch count. I think that just the lineups in the SEC are a lot deeper than they've been in years past compared to some of the pitching. I mean, if you look at Mississippi State, they really are kind of normally be a top 5 offense, especially what they showed this weekend against LSU. Because, even when Kellum Clark's kind of sitting at that 6-7 hole, that kind of shows how deep they are. But moving on into another kind of surprise of the weekend, Missouri goes out and sweeps Georgia. Georgia was kind of teetering on that bubble, and Missouri just came out, took it to them, and really kind of put some pressure on Georgia and Mississippi State and Ole Miss to kind of get into Hoover. They sit at 8-17, while Georgia sits at 10-15. And I think that this one's kind of the nail in the coffin for Georgia from a bubble standpoint. If you're some of those other bubble teams, I think you feel really good about Georgia being left out.
Well, I think Georgia, kind of controls their own destiny, right? So they're going in next weekend. They've got LSU coming into town. LSU scuffling. So that's a really big opportunity for a really big resume booster for Georgia if they can handle business at home, and maybe win a game or two in Hoover. I think they're certainly not going to feel comfortable going into Selection Monday, but they'll be in a good position, I think.
There remind me a ton of Alabama and Kentucky last year, where they kind of got hot at the end and it almost just seemed like too little too late. And I think kind of the understory is I think Charlie Condon doesn't win SEC Player of the Year. I think it's Ethan Petrie, as Georgia's kind of fallen out of that bubble because he has more home runs, he has a higher average, but I think Ethan Petrie's committed more to his team. And that was kind of the big knock on him all throughout this season, even when Georgia kind of went on that hot streak, was that it's going to be Ethan Petrie because South Carolina is just so much better.
Yeah, I actually disagree. I think Charlie Condon is the clear favorite for SEC Freshman of the Year. He's got better numbers. Georgia is, honestly, they're outperforming South Carolina right now. It's kind of hard to say because they just got swept, but over the last 3 weeks or so, Georgia has been the better team between them and South Carolina. Now South Carolina has reasons for that, and we'll kind of get into that later. But I think Charlie Condon should be the SEC Freshman of the Year.
Yeah, and I think the other thing too is there's a ton of SEC freshman talent this year. Jay Slavelette at Texas A&M, Ike Irish at Auburn, and there's a few other guys their names are kind of escaping me. But this is just a tremendous year for the SEC. As they kind of graduate some of the big bats like Wyatt Langford and Dylan Cruz. The future is still going to be bright for the SEC hitters, and then for the SEC pitchers, I think the nightmares kind of continue as well. Because again, in this Georgia-Missouri game on Saturday, they had a 14-12. Missouri flat out hits again, and I feel like that's going to be a common theme. And then at 20-28, I do kind of feel some type of way about Missouri because they got the injury bug there in the middle, and it's kind of a season of what ifs for them if they don't kind of get these big injuries. This is a team that swept Tennessee and then now sweeping Georgia, but outside of that, they're 2-17. I don't really know what to make of this Missouri team. Do you consider the season a success? Do you consider it kind of a disappointment because of where they were being ranked?
Well, it all comes back to what was your expectations going into the season, and nobody had any sort of expectations for Missouri coming into the season. They were picked to finish dead last in the SEC, and they're not that. And there certainly could have been much more, but like you said, the injury bug really hurt them. And you got to be careful not to change your expectations mid-season.
Yeah.
And so I think for Missouri, this is a good season. It could have been a great season, but I think this is a good season, especially if they are able to make it to Hoover and have a good showing in Hoover. This could be a really good season for them.
Yeah, and Missouri, again, has never been in NCAA tournament as an SEC team. I did have to verify that multiple times to make sure I'm doing that correctly. They've missed Hoover more than any team. So, again, I think that you kind of give them a C because, like you said, it's really hard to kind of tamper expectations with them because they were so bad. Another team that's kind of been outperforming expectations, Arkansas takes 2 of 3 from South Carolina, wins on Sunday, had to battle back. South Carolina have been sliding the last 3 weeks, still kind of clinging on to that top 10 spot as they look to host a regional. And then Arkansas with LSU kind of sliding out really is starting to look like the number 1 team in the nation. I think they're first in the SEC too as well.
Yeah, they are. They are first in the SEC. They have control for the SEC title, the SEC regular season title. And yeah, I've been super impressed with that team. They are really talented. There's a lot of depth. Having a starting rotation now that consists of Hagen Smith, Brady Tigert, and Hunter Holland is just disgusting.
And they back it up too with their bats with Kendall Diggs and John Bolton as well. They really. It's kind of weird to say because they've had so many big names come through there. This is a lineup that has quickly you've kind of feared the last 3 weeks, which I don't know if it was Arkansas Twitter overreacting, but I didn't really feel that way when, March turned into April. And Arkansas has really kind of turned it on here as of late.
Yeah, they have. And, a lot of people, myself included, kind of wrote this Arkansas team off that not that they were going to be, miss a tournament or anything, but, that they were just going to kind of be a middle of the road SEC team, a good team, but not a great team. But man, they have really, they've showed a lot of heart. They've had a lot of good performances from guys like Gage Wood. You mentioned Kendall Diggs, was their center fielder, Boffrin, and Jared Werner. He's kind of been hurt, but, he's still been a big part of this team.
In Arkansas, too, the thing about them is the way that they get runs is kind of strange to me because they really don't get it by the home run. I wouldn't say they get lucky bounces, but I know in the Mississippi State one, they had the bloop get 2 hits. And then on Friday against South Carolina, they had kind of a weird play to get them runs. So they really kind of can score any way. And again, just to kind of hamp on South Carolina, where do you feel like they fall in terms of hosting? As, a lost Arkansas really isn't that bag or anything to shake their head at, but they're kind of starting to pile up for the South Carolina Gamecocks. They sit at 14-10. This is their 3rd straight SEC series loss. Where do you kind of rank them?
I mean, they're on the bubble of hosting. I forget who. Let me look and see who they're playing. I forget who they're playing this weekend.
But it is Tennessee at home, which again, Tennessee is the same team on the road, and South Carolina is 100 times better at home. I mean, they're a top 5 team in the nation at home.
Yeah, and so I mean that's going to be a really good opportunity for them to really cement a host. If they could take 2 or 3 from Tennessee, I think that will lock in a host spot for them no matter what happens in Hoover. But certainly, even if they lose, say they go 1-2 against Tennessee, they've still got an opportunity to do well in Hoover and then, get a host spot.
I think they need 3 wins regardless of where they get them. So if they sweep Tennessee, I think they're a host. If they get 3 in Hoover, I think that they're a host, as long as they don't get swept by Tennessee. But they're kind of a weird team because they had such a good resume at the beginning, and it's just kind of incrementally fallen back, which again, I mean, the losses really aren't terrible. I mean, the Auburn loss looks a whole lot better now than it did when it was happening. The Kentucky loss, again, was on the road. Looks a whole lot better than it did when it was happening. And then Arkansas is many teams' number 1 team in the nation. So they're not bad losses, but they're kind of starting to pile up a little bit.
Yeah, like I said, you just certainly don't feel comfortable with your South Carolina, but they've got the opportunity. I think 3 wins. I think you're right on that. But the committee does tend to knock teams who are not, hot late. If you kind of cool off late, the committee does tend to knock you on that one.
And they also tend to knock you if you're bad on the road as well. They've punished Texas Tech numerous times lately for doing that. But to transition to, I think that the surprise of the weekend for me, Florida sweeps Vanderbilt. They flush the Texas A&M walk-off balk and just really kind of dominate the Vols. I mean, not the Vols, the Vanderbilt Commodores. And Jack Caglione was great for them all weekend. White Langford, again, has the bats rolling. And I think Florida has the deepest lineup in the SEC, which feels almost kind of dangerous to say with how deep some of these lineups are, especially LSU. But Florida, top to bottom, I think is the most dangerous lineup in the SEC.
I might push back on that a little bit and just say, I think it's really LSU where you got Cruz and White and Morgan and Dugas and all the and then you've got Hayden Travinsky and Braden Jobert that have really come on late in the season. But there's certain the argument can certainly be made, and you're certainly not way off base in saying
they're 1-2 along with Wake Forest. Like I think any one of those teams on any given day, I think just has the ability. But I mean, from what I've seen, especially, I think that the thing that sets Florida apart for me with LSU is BT Ridefield behind the plate. I mean, they have an experienced veteran bat that they all kind of trust and get behind. That I think LSU, I wouldn't say that they're lacking it, but I think that he kind of is a real big X factor for them in the lineup just because he has been there for so long.
Yeah, BT Ridefield is a really good player. He's a really good catcher. He's kind of an average catcher defensively, but offensively, he's definitely one of the best offensive catchers in the league. And he's a big factor. Going into the season, I kind of wondered where their run production was going to come from between outside of Langford and Riopel. I mean, obviously they've they figured that out between Rivera and Caglione, and the rest of their lineup has kind of figured that out and answered that question. But yeah,
well, Fabian's been tremendous for him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Derek Fabian. Yeah, because he came in place of Rivera.
For Vanderbilt, as you kind of look up and down their series, they have a series win over South Carolina and Kentucky. They got swept by Tennessee. They lost 2 of 3 to Alabama, and then now being swept by Florida. They built up a really good resume too at the beginning, and I think that they're about locked into host. But again, Arkansas comes to Nashville this weekend. How many wins do you think Vanderbilt needs to feel good about being a top 8 seed?
I mean, typically you're talking 17 to 18 wins in the SEC to feel good about hosting.
They sit at 17 right now, but I think that the 6 straight SEC losses and then, 8 of 9, I think could really hurt them down the stretch, losing 3 straight SEC series.
Yeah, I think as long as they get one from Arkansas, just don't get swept by Arkansas. And then, maybe take one in Hoover. I think they'll be fine to host.
I think their magic number is 2. I think that they needed to take, if they can get 2 of 3 of Arkansas, regardless of what happens in Hoover. But again, with the precedent that Ole Miss kind of set last year, Hoover almost really doesn't matter.
Yeah, no, I agree. And Corbin traditionally has not really put much effort into Hoover. I mean, if they win it, that's great, but he's not he's not emptying the tank in Hoover. He's gonna
against Ole Miss last year, who threw the complete game. It was that lefty that he had. And I think it was like their midweek guy. So they really didn't care. They kind of almost didn't know what to do with him in that situation.
Yeah. And go ahead.
I was going to say, moving on, another surprise team who I think has played their way off the bubble in a good way. Auburn sweeps Ole Miss, puts the nail in the coffin to the Ole Miss Rebels. Auburn sits at 13-13 in the league. And I mean, they've really come on here late. They're scorching hot.
They are. You don't feel comfortable with 13 wins, though. You kind of want, 16 is the magic number where you're guaranteed a spot in. But, I think 15 is their number. If they can go 15-15 in league play, or even if it's not, even if that 15th win comes in Hoover, I think they'll be fine to get into the tournament. I think they'll feel fairly comfortable.
I don't know. I feel like they have probably the 2 best series wins, with the road win at South Carolina and then LSU at home. I that's what makes me think about them being. It just feels like a Butch Johnson team where they're not near the top of the SEC. They're honestly kind of near more the bottom half, but they have these signature wins that kind of hold them above. And again, the Ole Miss sweep, with the rain kind of hanging around at Ole Miss. Ole Miss kind of had, an outside shot to kind of get back into Hoover, and Auburn just took it to them all weekend. I mean, 16-4 on Friday, 8-2, and then 13-5. I mean, that's pretty easy living for Auburn Tigers.
Yeah, I mean, they've really figured out, their lineup has really come on here in the second half of the season. The biggest key for them is they figured out their pitching staff. Tommy Vale and Christian Herberholtz have really been money for them down the stretch here.
Yeah, and I remember going back to that 8M series, their pitching is ultimately what cost them that game. They had a ton of walks. So, again, that's a series that they probably should have won. And, again, 12-2, 8-2, 8-3. I mean, those are – in the SEC going to win you a ton of games if you can hold people to 3 runs. Any word on Ole Miss? Okay, so I don't even feel like this is a disappointing Ole Miss team. I feel like this is kind of what I expected from Ole Miss, and that these past couple of weeks they just kind of played. It honestly looked like they gave up this weekend.
Yeah, I mean, I said, coming into the season that this Ole Miss team felt a lot like Mississippi State from last year, and it has played out that way. They may actually be worse than Mississippi State last year. But yeah, I mean, with the leadership that they lost, I mean, they still got dudes on that team. I mean, Kemp Alderman's a dude. The Hunter Elliott injury really hurt them. But again, that's just like Mississippi State last year with losing Landon Sims. But yeah, I mean, as long as they bounce back next year, they're going to be fine.
Yeah, and I think that they kind of needed a little bit of a hangover for that aspect. I think that they'll be fine. But again, at 25-25, they're squarely out, which it's almost kind of crazy to think about that after that weekend in Minneapolis, that they were ranked decently high, and then SEC play kind of came through, and they really kind of succumbed to the pressure in SEC play.
Yeah, I mean, they got off to a terrible start and just never recovered. I mean, they just, like you said, I think they just kind of mailed it in there. Just like, yeah, we got our national championship. We're good.
The last game on the weekend between two bubble teams, Alabama at Texas A&M. Texas A&M won on Friday behind 7 home runs, and then the rain kind of rolled through College Station, and Alabama really took it to Texas A&M. 12-1 on Saturday, run ruling them in 7, and then 11-1 last night as they kind of hung around to wait in the rain. And I really don't know what to make of this Texas A&M team. I'm trying to kind of put my bias and my homerness aside, but they really don't feel like a tournament team. I mean, they sit 12-13 in SEC play, 30-20 overall with some horrible, horrible losses. I think that this Alabama one really kind of gets them out of the tournament because I don't think that there's anything that they can do in Starkville to improve their resume.
Yeah, having the series against Mississippi State is not exactly a resume builder.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, if they get the sweep, that puts them at 15 conference wins, and they'll have a good shot. But anything less than a sweep, and then I think you can pretty much safely say that they're out.
Which again, I think their pitching staff is almost as bad as LSU's without Skeens. I mean, they have had one starter win a game since SEC play started, and that was a midweek. Their Sunday guy was a bullpen guy at the beginning of the year. Their best reliever was about 88, and his lefty was a JUCO guy. I mean, honestly, a lot of A&M fans are going to be annoyed and pissed off, but I think this is credit to Jim Schlossnagle and Nate Yeskie for the amount of stuff that they've gotten out of this pitching staff that has honestly been terrible most of the year. And even be sitting there in SEC play is just kind of a tremendous credit to them.
Yeah, I mean, they're both really good coaches, and they're going to do the best they can. They're probably going to hit the portal real hard on pitching this offseason.
Yeah, but again, as we saw with Mississippi State, that doesn't always come to fruition, and you really do kind of have to rely on freshmen because Paul Skeens really don't grow on trees. And if you look at a lot of the transfers that have come into the SEC, a lot of them have kind of been meh. I mean, Troy Wansing from Purdue is A&M, meh. Nixon at Mississippi State, I know he kind of gave Mississippi State the business, or LSU the business, kind of been meh. I mean, I'm sure
Thatcher Hurd at LSU.
Thatcher Hurd, Christian Little to some extent as well. Yeah. Hurston Waldrop, I think, hasn't really even been as good as advertised. I mean, he was supposed to be kind of be a top.
He's been a solid number 2 starter.
Yeah, but I felt like when he was coming in, he was going to be a top 10 draft guy. So if you give,
I mean, that was definitely the hype around him.
I mean, it was almost like a Skeens level. I almost felt like he had more hype than Skeens did.
I don't know that he had more hype than Skeens, but I would say as much. That's who everybody was like, yeah, he's the starter, or he's the Saturday starter, right? Brandon Sproat's the Friday starter, but Hurston Waldrop's the better pitcher. And it's like, I don't know about that.
For a lot of people arguing that Skeens and Waldrop would be in the same conversation, and I don't know if it's Skeens just going out and dominating and Waldrop kind of having but I mean, there's a massive gap there between the two now.
Well, there's a massive gap between Paul Skeens and every other pitcher. I mean, Paul Skeens is just different. He's just a different cat. Hurston Waldrop is a very good SEC starter and will be drafted, highly coming out probably, I would guess, in the second or third round. I don't think he's a first round guy, but second or third round, and he's going to make some team pretty happy.
I think he's going to be about where Detmer was at the beginning of the year, kind of in that 30 to 40 range, maybe a compensatory pick. But just to kind of jump back to Alabama, I mean, I was really impressed with their lineup. I mean, Jim Jarvis, Pickney, and Williamson in the middle, and then Temez obviously kind of cleaning it up for them. They are kind of an underrated deep lineup that can kind of stick to you. And at 33-17, 11-14 in the SEC, and again, they've had now back-to-back signature wins. It might be a little bit too little too late for them. How do you kind of feel about their chances to make the tournament?
There's enough buzz around them, and there's a good enough story with the Brad Bohannon getting fired and then this team rallying, that's something that, that's the kind of thing that the committee can latch on to, that if they can get to probably 14 wins between next weekend and Hoover, I think they'll be in the tournament.
Let's see who they have, just to double check. They finished with Ole Miss, so they could very easily get 3 wins. I think that their factors are more external. I think that, ECU has to win the American and knock Houston out. I think some of those ACC teams have to kind of get swept this weekend that are on the bubble. I think they have to have no bid stealers, because I feel like they are 64 of 64 right now in my head, just as I'm kind of mapping it out with Alabama. I think they're probably the last team in.
Yeah, they're going to be certainly, riding that bubble like Mississippi State was last year. It'll be interesting to see how it plays out. But they're a team that could be dangerous in Hoover. I mean, that's a team that's coming in that's got everything to play for. That, some of the other teams that may be just like, okay, ready to mail it in and, move on to regionals. That they're a team that could make some serious noise in Hoover.
And they did it last year too. I think them and Kentucky went really, really deep. Yeah, they beat. I remember they beat Arkansas in the first game, and then they kind of rolled through a little bit. Florida, so they were in the semifinal or the quarterfinals in the SEC. They were in the Final 6, and again, I think Kentucky was kind of in that boat last year. But again, Kentucky went to the semifinals in the SEC tournament and was left out. I mean, granted, they were 12th, so they were the last team in. But again, you really don't want to count on Hoover, because in the past, and especially given what they did to NC State in the ACC tournament, you really don't know how much these tournament games really matter in the committee's eyes.
Yeah, but I think Alabama still is in a fairly good position. Like I said, they got Ole Miss coming up, and then for them, I think it's more of a math problem of just getting the number of wins. And then, like I said, I think 14 is their magic number.
So 14 teams in the SEC. It's May 15th. How many SEC teams do you think make it?
I'm going to say 10 with 10. With Georgia, Mizzou, and the Mississippi schools being left out.
So you think both A&M, Alabama, and Auburn all get in? That's why I said is 10 feels really low for the SEC, but at the same time, Auburn, Alabama, and Texas A&M all kind of feel meh in the SEC. And A&M sits behind both Alabama and Auburn, and they're tied with. I think all three. That's the crazy part about this too, is Auburn beat A&M beat Auburn but lost to Alabama. Alabama beat A&M but lost to Auburn. So they're all kind of like very, very similar. I mean, the tiebreakers, if it ends up coming down to a tiebreaker, is going to be crazy for those 3 teams.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see what the committee ends up kind of valuing there. What I think what it may come down to is RPI. You look at where their RPIs are sitting.
And again, I think that we're gonna have to do a deep dive to see how many teams are kind of in that bubble. But again, Oklahoma's kind of playing their way back into the bubble. Virginia Tech's playing their way off the bubble. I mean, there's just about, I would say, 20 teams that you can make an argument for them to be out of the tournament, and then you can also make the same argument for them to be in the tournament. TCU is another one that's kind of in that boat as well.
I mean, Auburn's sitting at 20 right now in the RPI, so they have a really good RPI. So they're sitting in a good spot there. I'm looking for Alabama and the RPI. Alabama is at 11 in the RPI, so they're in a really good spot. Texas A&M is down at 39, so they're not in a good spot.
And they have Mississippi State this weekend,
Yeah. Well, Mississippi State now is a top 50 RPI team. They're a quad 1 team now. They're at 44 in the RPI, so that could still be a good win from an RPI perspective.
Yeah, it's just, again, you really never want to count on the committee if you're Texas A&M or NC State. Monty and I were talking about it earlier. You do want to kind of control your own destiny in there.
Yeah, for sure. But, from right now, Auburn and Alabama are in really good spots RPI wise, and so they're in a really good position to make the tournament. I mean, there are some people that are talking about Alabama as a host, which I mean that blows my mind. But I
I
think
more of
they
a
are
host.
sitting in a good position.
I think they're more of a host than ECU.
Ouch.
SEC players of the week, just on notes. Andrew Pinkney from Alabama hit 3 home runs as Alabama scored 28 runs on the weekend. Batted 474. Um, Hunter Holland, Hunter Holland was named SEC Pitcher of the Week as well. And then he was also named SEC Freshman of the Week, as well as David Mershon. Did I say that right? Mershon
Mershawn, yeah.
of Mississippi State. So those are kind of your 3 big ones. And again,
I was kind of surprised that they didn't do co-pitchers of the week with Holland and Skeens, with Skeens getting the complete game. But I mean, Holland won a complete game too, but he won a complete game 9 innings.
I think Skeens is it's kind of what's happened to Alabama football, where he's been so good that you just expect it. So it's like not even like a surprise at this point. It's like, oh yeah, Skeens would have to throw like a no hitter to be SEC pitcher of the week.
Yeah, he's pretty incredible. But yeah, I mean, Pinkney from Alabama, I mean, he gave LSU a lot of problems. I mean, even though LSU, swept Alabama, Pinkney was a thorn in their side for sure. And I was really impressed with him.
I mean, he impressed me all weekend, and I think he was the one guy that when we talked about Alabama in the preseason, he was the one guy along with Jim Jarvis who kind of stood out for him. And he really has kind of carried them since they lost their coach. They're 5-2 since he departed, and Pinkney's a big reason why that's happening.
Yeah, no doubt.
Well, I think that's all we have time for. Alex will be here next Sunday as SEP's play is Thursday, Friday, Saturday. We'll be breaking down the final week, previewing Hoover as well, and then again checking out on those bubble teams. One more time, this has been Jake McKeever and Alex Day with the Weekend Rotation SEC edition. We'll see everybody next week.